speed.
I'd like to hear more about your experience with the Public Broadcasting Laboratory, a very interesting experimental, criticized by some. What was that experience like? Now, what was it in terms of its importance in terms of the history of television journalism and your own development?
Well, my own development, it was that I was in charge of something which had a $12 million budget and 2 years to run. So that it brought a different level of experience in administration and things of that sort. The genesis of it was that Fred Friendly left CBS, and Mac Bundy was the head of the Ford Foundation. And an issue at the time was, should there be something called public television? It wasn't even called public television, it was educational television. And more than that, it was a series of individual stations that had there was no network. Each station was different. And any piece that was done, any documentary that was done, any performance that was done, was not shown simultaneously across the country. It was shown in New York on Thursday, and it would be, as we said, bicycled around to Chicago on Wednesday, and so it didn't have much of an impact. And Fred felt that if there was a network that had simultaneous transmission, whatever was on that transmission would have more of an impact and therefore be better. So he convinced the Ford Foundation to put up $12 million, and they hired me to run it. What its failure was twofold, I think, and it
Before talking about its failure, there was some interesting concepts of news and public affairs programming that I guess were considered there, and that had maybe an afterlife in terms of different bits and pieces influencing later development. So even before talking about the failure, what was the concept and what were some of the achievements?
Well, it was going to be a magazine show, which was pre-60 Minutes, series of 3 or 4 pieces. Some of them had a particular political edge. I remember we did a whole series of so-called anti-smoking commercials. And we did a whole series of, I wouldn't say exposés, because that today has the meaning of something detailed and long, but we examined, not fraudulent, overblown product claims. I remember there was one that we did about some gasoline, I think it was Shell, which claimed that it had an additive that improved it. Well, we found out that, in fact, that additive was not only in Shell, it was in every gasoline being sold, but that the price of Shell was affected by the fact that they were spending $88 zillion in advertising of the thing. So it was that kind of hardly detailed exposés, but it was that sort of thing. And we ran into a buzzsaw almost immediately. Remember, I said that the universe was a series of television stations which were desperate for money. And along comes this entity which is going to prove that the individual station should be subordinated to a network which was taking all the money they felt from them. So the stations essentially went out of their way to trip us on the way, up. I remember one station saying they would not carry the program because of this commercial that I just mentioned. Why? Because one of their major contributors in wherever it was the oil company. It was Shell, and they weren't going to have us do something that was essentially potentially embarrassing to them. So we never got any traction in that regard. The second thing is that we were the level of development of the stories was, I mean, I now know, having done documentaries and special reports and everything else since then, was really amateurish. that was I guess what Fred bought when he bought me. But we tried, and it lasted 2 years, and did demonstrate that a network was a good idea. But the quality of what we were putting on did not cause PBL to last.
Some people have said that that program did point the way to 60 Minutes and did influence Don Hewitt.
I don't think so. I mean, it'd be nice to claim that, but my sense is, I mean, Don was wandering the halls of CBS without an assignment because Fred had knocked him off Evening News and what have you, and he had come up with the idea for a magazine show, 3 or 4 pieces. His rationale for 60 Minutes was this. He had looked at, he had run Evening News, so he knew that at Evening News the piece couldn't run any more than 3 minutes. It just couldn't. You only have 28 minutes and 24 seconds of airtime on an Evening News. You take 3, 4, 5 minutes of that, you can't do that. You really can't. And the documentaries, he felt, quite correctly, frequently were padded to fill the hour. There's no question about the fact that even the vaunted CBS reports, the last 3 or 4 minutes of almost every program were intercutting talking heads saying the same thing that had already been said throughout the program. So his idea was, let's do a show that has pieces in it that run as long as they should run. 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 maybe, 6. That was the concept, and he executed it brilliantly.
Okay. How did you make the transition from PBL to ABC?
I had known Bill Sheehan when I was based in, and I had known Elmer Lauer. Elmer was the president of ABC News, and Bill Sheehan was the vice president. Bill and I had served together in London. He was the ABC correspondent in London when I was based there for CBS. And Elmer and I had known each other at CBS, so I simply called them up and said, I'm available. And they said, okay, would you like to be executive producer of Evening News? Not, but I like to. Here's the job. You want that? And I took it.
All right. Now, how would you compare what the state of ABC News was when you got there,
Well, I wrote a piece years later which contrasted what was then. I mean, it was in a state of penury. I mean, that's all it was. They had no concept for an Evening News. The guys who were running it were marginally, it's very difficult I don't want to slam these people. Compared to where the CBS machine was, or the NBC Nightly was, they were really unskilled in how to do an evening news program. And I, having run the CBS Morning News earlier, knew how to make a half hour interesting and important. And that's what we set out to do.
All right, so what were some of the changes that you made?
Well, the first thing is I set a set of rules about what it would be, what criteria should be in place for deciding what's in an evening news program. And they were 3 criteria. Is my world safe? Is my home safe? If it is, what's happened in the last 24 hours to make life better or worse? And having applied that rule, all the stories that were then then the second thing is I solicited reports from the correspondents. What do you think we should be doing? So it was top down, yes, but it was also from bottom up, and it was successful. I did still rely on the story definitions that I had experienced watching the BBC program. We broadened it out, and I knew we were making it. Number one, the ratings were coming up. As much as you wanted to ignore them, the ratings began to improve. More to the point, perhaps, is a number of ABC affiliates which previously did not carry the ABC Evening News began to carry it.
So was that a challenge you enjoyed, really taking the ABC News
Oh yeah,
to the next level?
It's a great sense of satisfaction when John O'Connor of the New York Times wrote, ABC News has found its voice. And the Wall Street Journal did a page 1 piece, column 1, page 1. What Arv Westin says is the news is the news. And then the New York Times did a subsequent one saying, is Arv Westin changing the face of TV news? I think those things...
And that was, how long did that take? When were those articles written, roughly?
I started in March of '69. I think they began to show up before the end of the year, but certainly the beginning of 1970.
Let me ask about some of the anchors and what you consider their strengths and weaknesses. Howard K. Smith, another CBS veteran, and Frank Reynolds. Also, the benefits, the pluses and minuses of having two anchors as opposed to...
Well, I did that. I used to kid that we didn't have Cronkite, so we had to cover that up with the Dance of the Seven Veils. And that is what we did was we were very much oriented towards our correspondent corps. Some of them were quite good. Some of them were marginal, but some of them were quite good. And I put Reynolds and Smith together. Reynolds in New York at that time, Smith in Washington. And I also stole a page really from what CBS had been doing, which was I put Smith on, and then we put Reynolds on too, to do a minute commentary every night. If I had been prescient, I would have realized that what we were doing is playing politically to a conservative base, because Howard was a hawk
on
Vietnam. And that lifted, that gave a safe haven to those viewers who were looking for that. I don't think anybody would have said that what we were doing was a precursor to Bill O'Reilly, but by expressing a conservative, find a different word, hawkish. Clearly, it appealed to an audience view. Now, I didn't successfully read the fact that politics could influence your ratings. I mean, I came out of the CBS school where it was Murrow, it was Collingwood, it was Severide, and whatever they were saying, as opposed to being here's a right wing or a left wing analysis. But the two anchors, the double anchor was my creation, and it worked. As I say, then John O'Connor did a piece in the Times which sort of anointed me, I think.
Now, how did Harry Reasoner come to join ABC News in 1970, and what did he bring to the program?
I was not privy to the negotiations, but I think what happened was that Harry wanted something over at CBS, and they weren't going to give it to him, which I don't know what that was, whether it was somehow being the anointed successor to Cronkite, or because Mudd wanted that as well, and I think that was so they offered him to come over to ABC, and he did.
So you were not a party to that?
No, I mean I had a new talent.
Yeah. Whom did you report to at ABC? Who was your immediate boss?
Bill Sheehan was the vice president, and Elmer Lauer.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of these, some of these larger-than-life personalities, what can you tell us about the decision to hire Barbara Walters as the first female news anchor?
That was in '76. I left ABC in '76, and so I was not part of bringing her over. I was part, because I came back to CBS in ABC rather in '77 or '78. 78. I was, by then Roon was the president, and he told me, get them off the air. And we did. I mean, the idea was, first of all, the two of them, it's legendary. The day I arrived back at ABC to run the evening news again, with Walter and Reisner, one of the producers who was in the Reisner camp, and it was divided that way, came to me and said, you know, she owes us 5 minutes and 25 seconds. Huh? What? They had been keeping a stopwatch of the number of minutes that Barbara had been on, that Harry had been on, and Barbara had been on 5 minutes and 25 seconds more, cumulatively, over a year. So, I mean, that was how bad it was. And I simply, and to quote Roon, it was like coming into a room after a divorcing couple had had a fight. The walls still are resonating. I simply divided the program up so that Barbara would introduce a piece and Harry would pick it up after the film would run. You never saw the two of them together. And it worked. And then we, at that time, behind that screen, we started working on changing the program.
What, in a nutshell, was the problem between them?
Harry was the quintessential male chauvinist. Absolutely. Second, he once told me, had been promised that he would be the sole anchor. He didn't need a co-anchor.
Yeah. What was and is your feeling about Barbara Walters as a journalist and as an anchor in that period?
First of all, I have to give you the history. You know this. I have told this story many times, and so has Barbara. In '53, when I was directing the morning show on CBS, Barbara was a booker, and your career line depended on how successful you were in arranging little vignettes that were part of the program. And she had arranged a fashion show. And when you were live, and there was no videotape in those days, so you did it live, and you rehearsed at 4 in the morning for the 7 o'clock program. And she came to me in tears because one of the models, and you need 3 models. One is on, one is ready to go on, one is changing. Barbara came to me in tears that one of the models at 4 in the morning had called up and said for her $75 fee she had something better to do and wasn't coming in. So Barbara was an exquisite woman, I mean, just beautiful, with the appropriate model shape. And I said to her, why don't you wear the costume and you be the third model? She remembers it as a green, not bikini, but two-piece bathing suit. I remember it as what my mother used to call a play suit, short one. But anyway, Barbara put it on, and that was the first time Barbara Walters was ever on camera and television. So we went back through the years. Mm-hmm. We had known each other. When we went to, in '72, when Barbara and others and I accompanied Nixon to China, Barbara missed the bus to go out to the television transmission point. Well, it wasn't a bus, it was a limo. The Chinese had set up limos for each of the networks, and it left at whatever time the Chinese said they were going to leave. So she missed it. So there she was standing there, absolutely distraught, and I said, come on, come in our bus, come in our car, because I knew her, she knew me. And so after some palaver with the Chinese, so this is most unusual, she got in and sat on our lap as we went out to the... So I had an ongoing relationship with Barbara, and it was not difficult for me to essentially assert command of evening news then, and Harry essentially quit.
Now,
What's your question about journalism?
Yeah.
I I saw Barbara at 2020 and the Evening News as well prepare for interviews. First of all, Barbara's a very shy person. I used to say to her and describe it as if Barbara would get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom for a drink of water, and in the light of the street light coming through the bathroom window, she'd see her shadow on a mirror, and she'd say to herself, tomorrow they're going to find me out. She had no confidence, or little confidence, in her abilities. As a result, she would prepare, and does prepare, just endlessly. If she was going to do an interview with you, I guarantee you she would call 15 people who know you to say, what should she ask? She was always concerned that the peer group would say, she screwed that up, or she certainly missed that one. She'd call everybody, anybody, to get the question. She'd write them on little cards, then she'd sort the cards, and that would be the basis of the interview. And I saw that a number of times. She is the quintessential reporter, and I can't say enough about it.
Yeah.
We're back on.
The fact that Barbara Walters was hired as anchor, the much publicized $1 million contract, was that an important landmark for women in broadcast journalism?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I played a small role, both negative and positive, in advancing women on. There's no question that we were a male chauvinist system. And I remember specifically during the Vietnam War saying no to sending Marlene Sanders to Vietnam. I justified it by saying it was too dangerous. But subsequently, somehow I overcame that, and we did start sending women into combat areas and putting them on the air in dangerous or just normal journalistic situations. The fact that Barbara came over and got a big salary, that's a kind of an interesting question. The stock answer would be yes, of course, she was the first one, and that's true. But whether it helped, because there was a considerable amount of derision, she had to prove herself. And I must say, reason it wasn't going to help. But when she did, and particularly that occurred at 2020, and the big hour interviews that she did with Nixon and Kissinger and all, I think that had more to do with it, with advancing the cause of women. And then, mind you, other women were coming along and doing a remarkable reportage in tough situations.
At the same time, there's all that publicity around her being an anchor. Is that the beginning or an important step in the phenomenon of the celebrity anchor that seems to become very important, for better or for worse?
By celebrity anchor,
just
they're all celebrities. They automatically, as soon as they get that seat, they become celebrity anchors. If you mean, when they're successful, they're less of a celebrity. Ann Curry at NBC is now regarded as a journeyman anchor, and moved into being co-host of the Today Show without a lot of hullabaloo. When Katie Couric left, that had a lot to do with celebrity, if you will. I think her celebrity was a factor in it, and the reason CBS hired her. And I don't think she had a chance. I mean, I think they were laying for her. I mean, the critics were essentially standing on tiptoes, ready to pounce, and she gave them enough to do it. They, just speaking from experience, I always felt that they made a mistake when Katie went to CBS by changing that format and claiming they were going to innovate a new format for evening news. If there's one area in television that is so part of the metabolism of news gathering and news presentation, it's the evening news. There's 28 minutes and 24 seconds. You can't screw around with that. People want their news. Now you can change different stories, but she insisted, for example, that because she has the credential of being a good interviewer, she was going to do a kind of an interview every night. Well, not every night is worth an interview, and not every interview is worth 5 minutes, and that was part of the problem.
Right. You mentioned the influence of the BBC on some of your work, and certainly in the BBC, the anchor the news anchor is less important than the correspondent. It seems to me, compared to the United States, that's even the more prosaic term of presenter is used. So, I asked a question just in terms of how it developed, and any thoughts that you might have that how the personality of the anchor, as well as the anchor, an individual's journalistic skills, defines a news broadcast. Here.
Well, news viewing is habit viewing. People, if you're satisfied with the folks who are presenting the news, you're not likely to shift unless you feel that you keep hearing in the elevator at work that the other guys had something spectacular last night. But basically, if you're happy with your anchor on the program you've selected, it's unlikely you're going to change. Now that means that you're being happy that that's that guy or gal's personality and that guy's or gal's approach to delivering the news. The role of the anchor on the network evening news has changed from being a reader who responds to what the producer tells him to do, to being an active participant in story selection. They all now have the title managing editor, and they all take it quite seriously. In my day, I was very fortunate. I was the boss, and what I said about what was going to go on the air, in what order, and for how long, was what went on the air, in what order, for how long. And the anchors essentially, whatever they had to say, I was always interested in knowing, and we never went to war over it. But subsequently, the anchors became very much more involved in story selection. Cronkite started that, and as time went on, it increased his, although initially his producers were very strong people. You have interviewed one of them, Sandy Sokolow, and what he said went. Subsequently, that wouldn't happen anymore. I don't think it happens. I've read a lot and talked to a lot of my successors on various programs. They're constantly at loggerheads with their anchor, which is, I guess, a good thing, because if the anchor has experience, that's important.
Yeah. Anything you'd want to tell us about the way in which the news evolved or changed during your tenure with the ABC Evening News?
Satellites, your ability to get the stuff in from everywhere. I mean, when I ran ABC Evening News twice, the first time I ran it was during the Vietnam War. We didn't have a satellite. Or we did, it was so expensive. We essentially, stuff was a day late, 2 days late. Later, that is. Once the satellites came, it was today's news, and the guys in the field really felt that, because there was none of that shoot and ship that I described to you before. You shot and you edited and you fed all in one day, and you better be ready because you got another one coming up right behind you. So that changed a lot of the ability to be on stories. Another change.
Could I stick with that for a minute? Do you recall when you first became aware of the impact of satellite and some of the early stories in which that made a difference?
I was the American producer assigned by the American networks to Brussels when Telstar went up. It was an 11-minute window twice every 90 minutes. And Fred Friendly was the pool producer in the States of the American presentation to Europe, and Paul Fox was the producer of Europe's. I could go on for several hours about what happened there. And then I subsequently, that was a non-synchronous satellite. I mean, that was...
Right, that's the Cue the Buffalo...
the Cue the Buffalo story, yes, right. Is exactly right. That was what happened for Fred. Jump ahead, I was the American pool producer for the introductory program, Europe and US, of Early Bird, which was an open-ended thing, and you could go for as long as you wanted, and we did an hour special with Europe and the United States, and the conclusion of that, I mean, among the things we were trying to show is that Early Bird had a two-way capability, and we had Dr. DeBakey, the heart surgeon, do open heart surgery witnessed by a group of doctors in Geneva. He was in Houston. That was extraordinary. The whole thing was contrived to demonstrate what we could do, and the final thing was we had the Red Army Choir, which happened to be in London visiting, so we took them down to HMS Victorious, Nelson's flagship. We had a German marching band. We had the West Point Choir, and which was on the steps of the Capitol. And by the way, all these things were live, had live coverage, and we put them all together, and the only song they all knew was Auld Lang Syne. So they played, and each of these groups joined into a massive musical coda to this program. So that was kind of fun to do. But that clearly, the two-way capability meant that you could do interviews, and then now the reaching out to a correspondent anywhere instantly is a significant change. I wouldn't say necessarily an advance, because what it did do was essentially diminish, if not eliminate, the whole business of editorial review. When you go on the air and you're switching to some guy or gal who's standing there, you don't have no idea what he or she is going to say. He may have said roughly, told you roughly and what it was all about, but there's no editorial block. Wait a minute, hold it, you got the facts wrong. So that's part of the advantage and disadvantage of all this technical stuff.
Yeah. And is there another change in that you want to identify?
Give me a hint.
Well, you said there was something else. I interrupted you. I think your flow there a little bit, but maybe we could discuss in terms of Roone Arledge's impact when he came aboard at ABC on the way news was done.
Well, he brought to the party the creative energy that he had with sports, and I mean, he is the guy who, if not directly responsible, at least partially responsible for things like instant replay and slow-mo and story development of up close and personal and things like that. So he brought that energy. The second thing is he brought with him a lot of money. Previously, as I would describe it, ABC was ABC News was penurious, and what we had when he came in, what do you need, and how fast can you put it to work?
How do you explain that change and the decision to bring him in along with all that money?
I think ABC itself had improved to being number one in prime time, so they could no longer duck the issue of being caring about news. Those were still the days of when the news was the jewel in the crown, and you really, the management supported it dramatically. He had the personal, if not friendship, personal associations with the management, which Bill Sheen and Elmer Lauer never did. He was a salesman, as a matter of fact, and he knew how to do it. It was a perfect example of why producers in charge will know how to make things happen, whereas lawyers in charge may not. I mean, that was a basic conflict. Example of, to go back to a bit of history, I ran and created the ABC News documentary close-up unit, which won DuPonts and won, I think we won 3 DuPonts and George Polk's and Peabody's. And that's when ABC was I used to kid around, ABC was the 5th network among 3. Nobody was watching ABC. And they made me a vice president of documentaries, and I went down to see the then president, I suppose, Elton Rule, president of ABC. And he said, we haven't got any ratings, but can you win us some gold? So we did. I mean, we went out and, we got the Emmys and we got all that kind of stuff. So that nobody had at that point the money or was willing to shell out the money to create a news division that was really strong.
Right.
And Roon's Roon's contribution was that he drove the news division to the number 1 position. He really did.
So can you tell us a little bit more, about how he did that, your relationship with him, how you felt about the innovations that he brought to the
Well,
news?
I was a beneficiary of them because I remember there was a device, I don't remember specifically what its name was, but it did certain visual things, and we couldn't get the engineering department to buy it. One of the engineering executives said, if we buy it, you'll use it. No kidding. That's true. And what's more, we need it in Washington. Washington, yes, we need it in Washington. Half our broadcast comes from Washington. We need it there. Well, Roon came in and asked for a shopping list. I need that. We had it in 24 hours. So that was a major, not only a morale booster. Then he went out and he began to hire people who brought to the party knowledge and expertise, and in certain cases, name value. Sandy Van Oker, Sylvia Chase. I'm not sure that these names mean anything now, but they did at the time. Diane Sawyer. We also hired young producers away from the opposition. We brought in Rick Kaplan, significant contribution, I think, like that.
I'm sorry, when you're moving your thumbs, you touch your soup when it's very close to the microphone?
Now, was it, so you had a good working relationship with him?
Yeah.
And was your role somewhat diminished with his
No, my role, if anything, my role was enhanced because there was a considerable amount of skepticism at ABC News about Roon Arledge. And a lot of people were concerned, Koppel being one of them, Barry Dunsmore being another, even Jennings, Peter Jennings. Who is this guy and what's he going to do to us? And I played a role as a kind of what's the word? Ameliorating the fears of the truth. When I remember I went down to Washington after he came in, and there was a staff meeting down there. And I said, we're going to be all right. And I felt we were going to be all right. And that kind of calmed the waters. I'm sure that others played the same role, but
was it his idea to add Max Robinson as an anchor?
the creation of the three anchor World News Tonight was a joint project. I mean, I was involved in it. Roon, of course. I'm not sure who else was. There were 3 or 4 people that he relied on. Max was a candidate whose name had never come up before, but he had heard about Max. My recollection is that he had heard about Max being a superstar in Washington, D.C. And the concept of having a 3-anchor situation, that again was trying to match Cronkite, the Dance of Seven Veils. You had 3 anchors, and maybe they would somehow take attention away from the fact that you really didn't have the same quality. But it didn't work. I mean, it worked for a while, but it was very cumbersome. And ultimately, a couple of things happened. Max quit and he subsequently died of AIDS. Reynolds died of bone cancer. That left Jennings, who was emerging really as the Paramount guy anyway. And so when we brought him back, and when he was, by then I was off the show. I was already over on 2020.
Right. I was just going to say we should turn to 2020. How did the idea for 2020 come about, and how did you come to be its executive director?
Roon wanted a magazine show, essentially to match card 60 Minutes, or no, 60 Minutes. NBC at that point had tried 17 times, I think that number is accurate, to create a magazine program and never could do it. It always failed. He wanted a match card for 60 Minutes, and so he created it. And he hired a guy named Bob Shanks to put together the program, and the first program was an absolute disaster. Just a disaster. And so Roon began, the story goes that the next day after the first show, he fired the 2 anchors, Robert Hughes and Richard Hayes, I think Hayes and Hughes. He fired them and found out that a guest on that morning's ABC morning show, wasn't even called Good Morning America then, was a fellow named Hugh Downs. So he hired Hugh Downs on the spot to be the anchor for and then he started shopping around for a producer. I was over on World News, and he ran through, maybe over a period of a month, of several months, a number of people. Jeff Grownick he had in there, Al Hiddleston, I don't remember who else, and it wasn't working. And it was becoming a black eye for him, because he was the quintessential producer, couldn't get a program on the air that anybody watched or even wasn't laughing at. So I got a telephone call, and I was told that Roon wanted me to go to run 2020. It was a transition period when I was in charge of both evening news and 2020, but that was an unworkable situation.
Mm-hmm.
And besides, I had burned out on evening news. You can do it just so much, and you got nothing left in you. So I went down and took over 2020, and that was we was pretty successful rather quickly.
Yeah. How would you describe the format and
Well,
and your vision for the program?
I created, well, the first thing I did, and it's a story that's been told several times, is I went to the head of research, audience research. I knew nothing about what prime time was all about, but I realized that 2020 was up against tough competition from cop shows and hospital shows, and that in prime time, news programs or information programs were no longer the kind of, as we discussed before, the kind of very special thing that everybody was going to watch. That no longer existed. You're on at prime time, compete in prime time. So we devised a series of shorthands for stories. I mean, there was what I call the process piece, which was how is something done. I mean, I used to just use this as an example. The new recording by Linda Ronstadt, who was a hot singer at the time. It wasn't, she's got a new record. It was, let's watch her make the record and see how it's done. We created something called Moment of Crisis, which was to go back and look at an event that had been covered from, extraordinarily, and find people in the video and say, what were you doing at that time? I went to all of the ABC correspondents and said, what story would you want to do if you could do it for 2020? And we got some pretty good ones, because lots of the reporters had this one extraordinary piece that they just were desperate to get done. That passion came through.
Right.
And then we had a group of correspondents who were quite remarkable. Geraldo Rivera, who was remarkable, and the pain in the neck.
Pain in the neck in what sense?
Oh, he's just, if there was any rule to be broken, he did it. And in some cases, he pushed the envelope too far. I mean, participatory journalism, running down the street after people, you stop, part of it was show business. But, Sylvia Chase, Lynn Scher, Tom Jarrell, who was sort of our investigative guy, mostly in defense stuff. At one point, we knew that 2020 had resulted, reports on 2020 had resulted in 17 legislative actions, either statewide or nationally. So that was the genesis of the program.
Yeah. How would you compare it to 60 Minutes?
Well, I made sure that we never were criticized 60 Minutes. They were our seed ground. What they did cleared the way for us. I think we were a livelier show than 60 Minutes in those days. In fact, 60 Minutes today, as we're doing this interview in 2011, is a lot closer to what 2020 was when I was running it in 1980, 87, 1989. They have a much wider mix. Hewitt used to say that he brought entertainment to magazines. He did, if you want to count Jascha Heifetz's concert or something like that. But I mean, we were doing it on a regular basis. So we were a livelier program. And the ratings showed it. I mean, we were in the top 10 almost constantly.
Any particular segments come to mind that you like to think back upon, or
well, the one that
of the program at its best?
Well, clearly, I mean, I mean, I remember the first moment of crisis, which I mentioned to you, was about the Walt Tower fire in New Orleans. And we found people who were trapped on the 85th floor, and the helicopter pilot who was going. That was quite a cool. You know, one year we won 11 Emmys in 1 year against all that competition.
Yeah.
It's hard to say at this hour, this late date. We did some pretty good stuff.
Was there a sense of competition with the other magazine programs in terms of getting particular interviews or stories?
Well, there were no other ones at ABC when I was running it. It was after I left ABC.
No, I mean, you know, among the networks.
Oh yeah, sure. And that's where Barbara would come in. I mean, Barbara would make that phone call, and we'd get it, or be in competition. We did a lot of she did a lot of interviews that were really bang on the news. I remember she went to Czechoslovakia about 2 weeks after the Velvet Revolution, and did Václav Havel, an interview with him. She was in Poland when they had martial law, and she did the interview with, what was his name? I don't remember anymore. Who was the head of Poland's military government?
Jaruzelski, was it? Something like that.
Marshal Jaruzelski,
Right.
Jaruzelski or something like that. Yeah, right.
In general, so you were satisfied with the quality of the programming?
Oh,
it pretty
there's
much
no
met
question
your
about it.
expectations.
So were our peers, because I mean, you could win 11 Emmys in 1 year, and we were pretty consistent in winning them. Journalistically that was right, production-wise it was right, and to be crass about it, the ratings were good too.
Stepping back a bit, when Capital Cities bought ABC in '85, how did that affect you, the news operation?
I had known the Cap Cities people beforehand. When I had left ABC back in '75 and '76, I went to work for Cap Cities, so I knew all these guys, and so therefore I was a kind of, what would you say, familiar to them, which was good. I mean, you know, I think that's how it works. It's all personal relationship.
Yeah.
They brought to the party a greater concern for dollar expenditures, smart money. They once asked me to, and I did. I wrote a memo for them about cheap minutes and expensive minutes. I'll give you an example. It was a producer at ABC who thought nothing of sending a crew out to get a particular sunrise, when we had stock footage of sunrises everywhere. We didn't need to do that.
Yeah.
It was that kind of thing. They were supportive of us spending money to gather the news. They were not involved, for example, in shutting bureaus down, which subsequently happened later on.
In 1987, Geraldo Rivera was fired from the program. Why? What's the background to that?
Well, he had management, which was Roon and David Burke and Dick Wald, I think ran out of patience with his going off the reservation a lot. And the episode there were a number of episodes. A close associate of his was picked up for bringing marijuana into the office. That was not a good one. We had done a piece about Marilyn Monroe's relationship with the Kennedys, Jack and Robert. And we had done it, we had nailed it very, very thoroughly, believe me. It was to the point, for example, of interviewing two FBI agents simultaneously in different places so that they couldn't compare notes.
Yeah.
We were also aware that the BBC was doing a similar story. We had it nailed. And Roon, I suspect, because he had a relationship with Ethel Kennedy, called me up and said, "You're not going to run it." He left enough wiggle room that we might have run it. So we were essentially, I don't remember, we were sitting there in the control room waiting for Godot. I don't know what we expected was going to happen, but and we had an alternative show ready to go, which is what we ultimately ran. Geraldo, first of all, came into the studio, that night, and made some kind of a grand speech about the management of this company is terrible, blah, 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 blah. And taking a position which he had no right to take. He wasn't involved in the story and what have you. And that got publicized, I think, because he called it around. I'm not sure. It's vague now, you know. That exactly stays at the top of my memory. But management had it.
Right.
And they had just re-signed his contract, or they just renegotiated his contract. So they had an out, and they just decided we're not going to redo it.
Any thoughts you want to add about him as a journalist?
I once sat him down, and he kept telling me he wanted to be the next Edward R. Murrow, and I said to him, "You can be the next Edward Murrow," because I thought he really, it was this particular style, and he was kind of pushy and all of that, and pushing the envelope. But I said to him, "If you want to be Edward R. Murrow, I can help you be Edward R. Murrow. You need an editor." And he said, "Yeah, you're right," and he behaved himself thereafter. But his tendency was to jump off a cliff every time. And he had a lot, I wouldn't say enemies, serious critics. He was not above staging a shot, or at least giving his critics an opportunity to say it was staged. Classic one was during one of those Mideast wars. And he was allegedly in a foxhole, and
I believe it was Iraq. Yeah.
Was it Iraq?
I think so.
No, but Iraq was after he left.
Right. This was before. I see. This was before.
This was some war during his ABC tenure, but the same drill.
Any other thoughts about his work since subsequent to his ABC period?
I haven't watched him in a while. I don't know where he is now. He's at Fox, I think.
Right. All right. I think this is a good place to end the tape.
I have not discussed two things.
No, it's just.
Oh.